Welcome to the Health Babes podcast with Doctors Becky Campbell and Crystal Home, where we talk everything health.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Health Babes podcast. Today we have Dr. Paul Saladino. He is the leading authority on the science and application of the carnivore diet and animal-based diets. He has used these diets to reverse autoimmune disease, chronic inflammation, and mental health issues in hundreds of patients, many of whom have been told their conditions were untreatable. So let's welcome Dr. Paul Saladino, aka the Carnivore MD, to the Health Babes podcast. All right, everybody. Welcome Dr. Paul Saladino to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
So, all right, let's talk about, you're known as the Carnivore MD. And carnivore is a very hot topic right now. So I think you're the go-to person when it comes to this. So before we kind of get into what that is, kind of walk us through your journey. Like, how did this all get started for you?
I grew up in this medical family. I had pretty traditional upbringing, dinner table conversations around atrial fibrillation and Coumadin because my dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse. I did the normal stuff, high school, then college at William & Mary, studied chemistry and biology. And somewhere in college, I got kind of burned out. I studied super hard. I thought I was going to go to medical school right out of college and then ended up taking 6 years off. And I had 6 years of just adventuring and exploring in the wilderness. I was in Wyoming and the Tetons, skiing mountains and backcountry skiing and trying not to get caught in avalanches. And then I was in New Zealand swimming flooded rivers and backpacking and trying not to fall off of mountains and mudslides and all this kind of stuff. And I think that probably changes the way that I see the world in some ways. So after that experience, I went back to PA school. I was a physician assistant in cardiology. I went to George Washington University and then worked as a PA. So that was my first experience in Western medicine. And I thought it would be a good compromise. My dad's a doctor. I saw him work a lot and not have a lot of time for himself and his lifestyle. And I didn't want that to be my path. I was always very interested in the quality of life and having time to do the things I liked and also maintaining healthful experience of all of it. But really quickly, when I was working as a physician assistant, I realized that the system that I had become a part of was not something that I agreed with. It was very pharmaceutical centric and symptom focused. And I thought, this is horrible. This isn't what I want to do. We're not actually getting to the root cause of illnesses for these patients. And that's pretty much passé to say that today, but it's true. And it continues to be true that Western medicine does a fantastic job of treating acute illness, whether it's a heart attack or a broken bone. And we do a really good job of cutting out tumors, things like that. But we do a really horrible job of understanding what makes a healthy human, what human physiology, what human metabolism is really running on. And I mean, I kind of joke about this with my friends all the time. There are billionaires now putting them and their friends into suborbital space. And, but we haven't agreed in the nutrition world what the optimal diet is for humans, or if there's a different diet for different humans, or how different that dietary variation might be between humans, or what is actually causing psoriasis or eczema or asthma. I mean, these are important problems that affect millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the autoimmune spectrum, right?
Right.
And we haven't really focused on that. We're much more excited. And this is just kind of the way it goes in a capitalistic medical system that's based on a pharmaceutical model where most of the profit is. We're much more interested in the newest drug, the newest biologic, and we turn a blind eye, sometimes gleefully, sometimes not, toward the side effects of those medications, thinking, look at this biologic medication you can take for your Crohn's or your ulcerative colitis or your psoriasis. And, never mind the fact that it's going to increase your rates of cancer or tuberculosis or solid organ tumors or any of these things. So this system it didn't sit well with me at all. And I thought, okay, there's something wrong here. I am most interested in what's causing these illnesses. I want to know what is causing atherosclerosis, what's perhaps the one that was nearest and dearest to my heart, because my father had evident atherosclerosis when he was 42 or 43. I remember I was working in a molecular biology lab at William & Mary, and I got a call from my mom saying, oh, your dad's going in for an angioplasty, which is a ballooning of an artery, because he was acutely having chest pain. He had an acute coronary syndrome when I was maybe 19 and he was 42 or 43. So I just always thought, like, what causes atherosclerosis? That was the center of my thinking. But I had eczema, I had asthma, I had my own autoimmune diseases, and they flared and came back throughout my life. And I thought, what is causing these? So kind of woven into all of that was my own personal dietary journey I think somewhere around the time of my PA school, I started thinking a little more about my diet intentionally. I'd never eaten a horrible diet, but I think before that I was somewhere between standard American and slightly better than standard American.
Right.
And
yeah.
I had 7 months where I was a vegan. And at that time I was sort of bought into this propaganda around meat being bad for you or cooked foods being bad for you. So I was not only a vegan, I was a raw vegan. And I lost 25 pounds of lean muscle mass. I became extremely skinny, like virtually cachectic, and had horrible gas and bloating and just didn't feel very good. I persisted with it for 7 months thinking that I surely was doing the right thing, but it didn't quite ever pan out for me. So I added meat back to my diet, gained some weight back, but still had eczema even for years after that. So at some point after that, I went back to medical school at the University of Arizona, continued to have eczema, continued to have asthma intermittently, depending what I was doing and where I was, and had a really good diet at that time. I was eating what many people would consider to be a fine diet of vegetables and fruit and nuts and seeds and mushrooms and well-raised meat. So I was basically eating a paleo diet. But my eczema continued to flare at times massively, so much that it was over my face or my back or my arms, my wrists, my knees. And many times throughout my life, whether it was medical school or after medical school and residency at the University of Washington, I was really prevented from doing the things I wanted to do by this eczema. So at this point, probably halfway through my residency at UW, I really became quite frustrated with all of it and thought, there's something else going on here. This isn't the ideal diet for me. And I'm fascinated by autoimmune disease. The further I got in my medical training, the more and more interested I got in autoimmune disease as kind of as a model for chronic illness in general in humans. And I thought, if we can understand what's causing autoimmune disease, I think we're really going to have a good sense of where we might start for humans in treating chronic illness. So it was at that point that I began to think differently about plant foods, specifically about vegetables. I got interested in a carnivore diet. And the first thing I did was I cut out all the plants in my diet. So the next year and a half was just meat and organs and animal fat for a year and a half. And then there's another chapter of the story that I'll tell you in a moment. But the fascinating thing about that experience was that it taught me so much, and it really did improve a lot of the things that I had not been able to fix previously. And wasn't like I was eating junk food. I am very strict about my diet, no matter what I'm doing. I was never eating seed oils, even on a paleo diet. I was never eating processed sugar. Almost all my food was organic, and yet it still was triggering my autoimmune illness. So enter carnivore, organs, meat, basically animal fat, and the eczema gets better and really doesn't recur to any significant extent until I start reintroducing foods. And so that's amazing. A year and a half, no eczema, whereas previously it was very bad. I unexpectedly experienced more mental clarity and sort of mental stability, like emotional stability. I call this the metric of how likely you are to honk at someone in traffic went way down. So I was living in Seattle. I didn't drive a lot, but when I did drive, I just felt, I'm a little more poised, a little more calm. My brain felt better. And that was enough to really set me down the rabbit hole and get me interested in this notion of animal foods and then plant foods, and reconsidering how we've traditionally thought of both of them. Because most of your listeners will know that if you listen to any amount of mainstream media, which I would highly advise against, if you consume any of that content, you will quickly be indoctrinated to the perspective that meat is bad for you, and maybe you can eat it on Christmas as a treat, but it's like a cigarette, and plants are good for you, and the more plants you eat, the better. And so a lot of my experience has directly challenged all of that, and I've gone the complete opposite direction.
So for those who don't know what a carnivore diet is, can you tell us, what can you eat on a carnivore diet?
I think there's different incarnations of it.
And your version.
Yeah. So traditionally, let's talk about two things: carnivore and carnivore-ish, or animal-based is what I would call the second one. And so a traditional carnivore diet, like the strictest definition, and I don't really like dogma or strict definitions in the first place, but the strictest definition of a carnivore diet would be all animal products and no food that is not an animal product. So that might include things like eggs, beef, chicken, turkey, fish, seafood, shellfish, organs, and fat. That's a strict carnivore diet. What I discovered was that that's perhaps too far for most people, including myself. Many benefits to eating that way. It's a very powerful version of an elimination diet, in my opinion, because you cut out essentially every single plant antigen that could be triggering an autoimmune illness. I don't think plant antigens are the only cause of autoimmune illness, but I think a lot of people who continue to suffer with recalcitrant autoimmune illness could do well from cutting out more of the plant antigens. So what you're cutting out in that type of a diet is all vegetables and all fruits. So having essentially zero or very, very low carbohydrates in your diet is not ideal for most humans. That would be 98% of most humans. Mm-hmm. It took me about 1.5 years to figure this out. I was in ketosis strictly for probably 1.5 years plus. There's a small amount of carbohydrate in liver, but there's essentially, you're under 10 or 15 grams of carbohydrates a day when you're eating that way. And long-term ketosis, I think, results in many electrolyte deficiencies for humans, leading to muscle cramping, heart palpitations, hormonal issues, et cetera. It's powerful in the short term, just like fasting is powerful in the short term. But I think of these as powerful medications that can easily be overused. So then the evolution of my thinking was really more toward a carnivore-ish type diet, which is also known as animal-based. I've used both terms interchangeably. And this is the same principles as a carnivore diet, focusing on meat and organs as the majority of your diet, and really understanding, it's almost a lot of mindset also. It's understanding that when you're looking for nutrients in the human diet, out of the options that you see before you, organs especially, followed by meat, and this would be really all animal foods, are the powerhouse. Those are the true occupiers of the head of the pantheon of the food, pyramid, or the house of the food, deities, in my opinion. Those are the foods our ancestors have always sought preferentially. If you go to talk to hunter-gatherers, I went to Africa last year and I spent time with the Hadza, and you ask them, what is your favorite food? Unequivocally, they say meat. And by meat, they mean the whole animal. They always eat the whole thing.
Nose to tail, right?
Yeah, there's no question that animal foods are the center of the human diet. And then to that, I think we add the least toxic plant foods for color, variety, texture, flavor, and carbohydrates, which help humans function physiologically. So that's really where I've evolved and tended to now as a carnivore-ish diet. So I eat organs, I eat meat, I eat animal fat, and then I eat the least toxic plant foods, which in my belief are the fruit. And then we can dig into why I think fruit is less toxic. But then other plant foods, the whole other version of plant foods is the vegetables, which are things like leaves and stems and roots and seeds. And there's a real clear delineation between those two types of plant foods when you think about it.
Okay, so let's dig into that. So what about plants is inflammatory for people? And then, why not fruit? Kind of distinguish between the two.
Yeah. So think about it like you're a plant. I'm looking out my window here. There's a lot of plants, a lot of trees and, large shrubs outside my window. And you can see leaves and you can see stems and I can see bark. I can't see the roots, but I know they're under there in the ground. And then, that seeds are contained within fruit. There's a papaya tree over there, and I know there's seeds in those papayas. And so canonically, we think of vegetables as leaves and stems and roots and seeds. Seeds being seeds, nuts, grains, and beans. Those are all seeds. So the intention of plants is very clear. The purpose of a plant is to gather sunlight in the leaves, to photosynthesize in the chloroplasts, to make sunlight into glucose, which is then stored in the roots and throughout the plant and is used by the plant for energy. That's moving in the phloem and the xylem and the stems. And then the roots are stored, the storage form of this energy. And then they're also there for anchoring the plant in the ground. And the whole point of being a plant is to put all of your energy into a seed where you package your DNA and all of this information to make a new plant, to move your DNA to the next generation. That's the point of all life, is to move their DNA to the next generation, whether it's a plant, whether it's an insect, whether it's a human, whether it's a moose. We're all trying to move our DNA to the next generation. And anyone who has had a child will know this, the process of making a child, the process of making the next generation of your DNA is a massive energy commitment, and you protect it with your life many times. I mean, look at what happens when a tourist in Yosemite gets between a mother bear and her cubs, or, heaven forbid, you get between a tiger and their babies, anything else. Those people get killed or attacked. And so plants feel the same way about their seeds, which are the plant babies. They're going to defend those seeds as much as they can. And plants are stuck in the ground also. They're going to defend themselves. So now that you've understood how plants are making seeds and what plants really want to do, you have to realize that nothing on the earth wants to get eaten. We're all in this competition, whether it's a fish. I surf every morning here in Costa Rica, and there's all these little fish that run away from the big fish. And sometimes they jump out of the water, or you're a deer that's running away from a hunter, or you're a plant. None of these things want to get eaten, but they all develop defense mechanisms to prevent that. Now, many things have motility. Fish can swim away, or they have safety in numbers, or they camouflage themselves in the ocean like an octopus. But plants are rooted in the ground. They can't really run away from us. Some plants can quote unquote bite, like a cactus might have spines to bite you, but most plants don't sting you if you touch them or if you eat them that we know of. I mean, some of them do, and we can talk about those examples. But plants have been very crafty. They've said, okay, our lot in life is to be rooted in the ground. And we have these leaves and we can photosynthesize, and our superpower is that we can make sunlight into energy. Not a lot of things can do that. But in a trade-off, they've also sacrificed motility, and they've had to evolve defense chemicals. So the fact that defense chemicals exist in plants is not fairy tale or conjecture or opinion. It's botanical science. There's really millions of them, and only a small fraction have been characterized. But of the ones that have been characterized, we have to ask the question, what is the intent of plants? And what is our assumption about these chemicals? And I think we've gotten it all wrong. We've assumed that plants are innately benign and that for some reason they want to help us. And I would say, let's consider the opposite perspective. What if plants actually don't want to help us? What if they're kind of saying, hey, I'm not going to hurt you unless you come over near me like a snake, right? If it was like a rattlesnake. If you mess with this snake or an alligator, it's going to bite you. But the plant is going to say, hey, this is my space. But if you eat my leaves or you eat my stems or you eat my babies, I'm going to do something to dissuade you from doing that again or in excess amounts, or my DNA will not pass to the next generation. So this is really the way that plants are thinking, and why these plant chemicals can be harmful for us, because they are, in essence, defense chemicals. They're meant to dissuade us from eating them. And so there's a lot to unpack here because we've been so programmed in the opposite way. But if we just think about it from the perspective of plants, we can shift our assumptions. And if we begin to look at the literature from that perspective, what if plants don't like us? What if plants don't want to get eaten? A whole different way of seeing it, and a whole new world of literature opens up that is very, very often ignored. And then so I'll just add this last part about fruit, right? So that's the vegetables, that's the leaves, stems, roots, and seeds. But the one part of a plant that a plant wants you to eat is the fruit. That's what it's going to make sweet and colorful. And that's where it's going to package its seeds. But there's a real delineation between the fruit and the seed. The plant doesn't want you to eat the seed, but it wants you to eat this fruit so that you'll eat the seed and then hopefully not destroy the seed in your mouth and then poop it out somewhere that's fertile, like a pile of poop. So that's the differentiation there. So plants are not really defending flowers and fruit. We don't find as many defense chemicals in those. We find fragrance, we find sweetness, we find color to attract insects, to attract animals, birds, humans, other animals that'll eat the fruit and then move the seeds somewhere else. So there's a real difference in what plants are intending in those two. So if you're going to eat plant foods, then I think that fruit is the place to start for most people.
So kind of to sum it up, as far as animal versus, vegetables, right? Vegetables can't run away from you. So they're going to produce more defense chemicals than an animal would, because an animal can run away from you. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Animals don't really make defense chemicals. We know this. Like there's, 99.9% of animals are edible.
That makes
and maybe
sense.
only 20% of plants.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Won't kill you dead or give you massive GI distress, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. I mean, if I walk outside here in Costa Rica and start eating plants, number one, they're horrible. They're really not going to taste good. They're fibrous. I can barely chew them. There's very little that I can even get in my mouth and swallow. But very quickly, I'm going to just be vomiting or have massive diarrhea if I just start eating these plants. But basically, any animal that I catch in my yard here, and I'm not hunting in Costa Rica, you're not supposed to, but I get these little raccoons. And if I could catch a raccoon, or there's a deer in the front yard, or there's an iguana, like you could eat all of those animals and be just fine. Or a crocodile in the ocean, or a fish, or a snake, or a shrimp. Yeah.
Do you eat raccoons?
No, I don't eat raccoons.
I'm just wondering. All right.
They're just in my yard. So it's like an example,
I was like, wow.
What's here and what's wild in Costa Rica. Yeah.
Okay.
We call them mapaches.
So let's talk about dirty carnivore, and there's like, you hear dirty keto, clean keto. Is there dirty carnivore versus clean carnivore? Like, do you eat dairy, for instance?
Right. So I think I think these differentiations can be helpful, dirty versus clean. I think it all has to do with food quality, and that you can do a carnivore diet with beef jerky and deli meat. And that wouldn't be high quality food. We know that deli meat is highly processed. It goes through tubes and hoses and factories. Who knows what kind of xenoestrogens or chemicals are added? We have no idea what the quality of that food is. If you're getting ground beef, it's gone through a stainless steel grinder, and that's about it. If you're getting a steak, it's basically been sliced with a knife, and that's the only processing. So it's not that processing of foods is bad. It's just the degree of processing can induce many contaminants, even in foods that we think of are as good. I was talking to someone the other day about these Applegate chicken sausages at the grocery store, and they say they're organic, but they're so highly processed. They're making chicken into like a sausage. Like chicken doesn't look like that. They had to squeeze it and extrude it and had to go all through all sorts of things. And you don't know what the tube is made out of and what's the heat. And like, is a derivative of the tube, you know how when you're drinking that water in the summer, I don't do this anymore, but in the summer you drink water out of the hose and it tastes like the hose. So that's because there's a bunch of freaking plastic chemicals that you're drinking in the water from the hose. As a kid, you're like, oh, it's fine. And you're resilient. Doesn't matter. But what if all those hose chemicals are now in the foods that you're eating, these processed deli meats? So that's not a good way to eat an animal-based diet in any way, shape, or form. You want to get the least processed versions of those foods. And then you want to get the foods that are the highest quality. There's always concern here. What is the cost? And we can address that in a moment. But if you're eating meat, eat non-processed meat and preferably get it from a source that's grass-fed and grass-finished. Even better, get it from a source that's regenerative. You definitely need organs in your diet to complete the nutritional spectrum of what we are getting and benefiting from in foods. And then also, I think when it comes to dairy, it matters what's the quality of the dairy is. This is something that I've experienced firsthand. I've seen a lot of other people experience. So strangely, within the carnivore diet movement, some people would say like humans don't need calcium in the diet. And I think, I'm not sure exactly how you arrive at that conclusion, but pretty sure humans benefit from calcium. There's a lot of evidence that calcium in the gut is associated with all sorts of positive outcomes, whether it's decreasing the absorption of soluble oxalates, or it's at least associated with lower incidence of gastric cancers. And then in animal models of mice and rats, we know that calcium deficiency or calcium adequacy is the major determinant of whether heme iron will induce precancerous lesions in the guts of those rodents. So a lot of times, this is just a quick aside, a lot of times plant-based advocates or people who are anti-meat will point to the fact that heme iron, which is the form of iron, the iron atom that's in a porphyrin ring, that is cancerous in the gut. And that's really not true. It's not the whole story. So if you look at mouse and rat studies, that doesn't happen. Like heme iron, any of the components in meat do not induce cancers in animal models in the guts if those animals are fed a calcium adequate diet, a calcium replete diet, but they have to make the mice calcium deficient to even induce the cancers to happen. So this is all to say that sources of calcium in the human diet are probably valuable. There are non-dairy sources of calcium, but for those who can tolerate dairy, I think dairy is a great option, especially if it's grass-fed and grass-finished, because it's going to have vitamin K2, it's going to have choline, it's going to have all sorts of good things in it, and it has a little stearic acid, which we can talk about. And I think that for me and for many others, what we find is that raw dairy is the best source. Now, thankfully, you can go to Whole Foods, a lot of places, or higher end supermarkets and get a truly raw cheese, which is great, something like Parmigiano Reggiano. If you're fortunate to live in a state where raw dairy is legal, you can usually go to a farmer's market, support a local farmer, get raw cow or dairy milk. And that for me has made all the difference. When I introduce non-raw dairy, I see skin reactions, I see recurrence of eczema. But raw dairy seems to have a different reaction for me, which is quite fascinating because it points to something that I've seen over and over in this sort of nutritional journey, which is that food quality matters and the devil's in the details. That there's a lot of nutritional reductionism that happens in these conversations. People in ketogenic communities will want to conflate honey with processed sugar. And it's the same thing that I would say here, those are not equivalent. Raw dairy is not equivalent to processed dairy, et cetera. There's a lot of nuance to be really, I think, explored there.
Yeah, I can completely tolerate raw dairy, whereas, conventional dairy, I don't at all. I love raw dairy. I can get it here. So I don't do it all the time, but I definitely do eat raw cheese, when I feel like it.
Raw dairy is great. I mean, since reintroducing it in my diet, I haven't had any recrudescence of eczema and I feel better. It was something I didn't include for a while. It was the last thing that I included. So the first things I cut out were all the plants, and then I reintroduced some fruit and honey, which is another, I think, very valuable thing for humans when it's raw. And then I introduced raw dairy probably a few months ago, and it's been a great experience. It's just a matter of finding the higher quality food. So that's the differentiation for me, is what's the quality of the food for dirty versus clean experience of any of these dietary strategies. The other nuance to point out there, which is important and trips a lot of people up, is that what your food eats is also important. So a pig or a chicken is a monogastric animal, and these animals will incorporate more polyunsaturated fatty acids into their fat tissue when they are fed corn and soy versus a more species appropriate diet. I think all of these conversations are asking questions, and this is a fascinating question to me. What is a truly species appropriate diet for humans? And if we're going to ask that question, I think the answer we arrive at is something like an animal-based diet: organs, meat, fruit, honey, raw dairy. But we also need to ask that of the animals that we are consuming. Would you consume a farm-raised salmon? Most people would say, no, I wouldn't consume farm-raised salmon because it has polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. It's not fed what it's supposed to eat. And if you look at a pan of farm-raised salmon, they're not as healthy as wild salmon. Well, we have to realize that most of the chicken and pigs that we eat are, in a sense, quote, farm-raised. And I'm using the air quotes to indicate that they're fed corn and soy primarily in their diets, which is not a species-appropriate diet for these monogastric animals, chicken and pigs. And it leads to fatty tissue, which is enriched in linoleic acid, which is a real problem for humans, I believe. That's a fun rabbit hole to go down also. So sometimes when people start a carnivore or carnivore-ish animal-based diet, they'll say, I just had a conversation with a friend the other day, and she said, oh, my husband is eating a lot of bacon. I was thinking, okay, like it's okay to eat bacon sometimes, but to make it the majority of your fat is not a good choice, in my opinion. It's not as high quality as a grass-fed beef, just because it's not eating species appropriately. Now, if you had a wild pig or you could hunt a wild boar, this would be a completely different situation. But for most of us, it's difficult to get pigs and chicken that are truly, well, close to wild. Now, people might say, well, cows are raised on farms as well. Yes. And a species appropriate diet for a cow is grass. Right. And that's much easier to get. So there's a lot more cows in the world that are eating a lot closer to what is really species appropriate than pigs and chicken. Does that make sense?
It does. What do you think about pork being, a lot of people say there's parasites in pork versus, like a cow.
There's definitely parasites in pork. There's some animals like bear has a lot of the same parasites. I mean, there's tapeworms in pork, and there's pork tapeworm, and the same tapeworm I think occurs in bear meat. You can eat a medium rare steak. You don't want to eat medium rare pork.
Right, exactly. And that's why you're not supposed to. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk testicles, because on Instagram, I see you eating testicles and obviously other organ meats. So let's talk about, they're very nutrient dense, but let me have you go into why you eat the organ meats.
So meat is great. Muscle meat is great, but it's just part of the equation. If you look at the nutritional content of muscle meat, it's very rich in a lot of things: B12, iron, B6, but it doesn't have a lot of folate, doesn't have a lot of riboflavin. It's got zinc, doesn't have a lot of copper. There's some choline, but other organs have more. There's not a couple of things that are meant to be kind of complementary. But when you expand to eat the whole animal, you start seeing a lot of these things show up. Liver is the traditional example. Liver is great. It's a great source of folate. It's a great source of riboflavin, 2 critical B vitamins for methylation. It's a good source of choline, and it has copper, which balances zinc and muscle meat. It's a great source of biotin, which everyone thinks about for hair, skin, and nails. And then beyond that, liver has unique peptides that are found within it, small protein molecules, less than 50 amino acids, that have signaling roles in the human body. Many of these actually appear to survive digestion and have kind of microhormonal effects in humans. So the organs really complete the muscle meat. And we see this traditionally in all hunter-gatherers. The Hadza will never waste anything. When I was hunting with them, the first thing we would eat was the organs. We hunted baboon and genet cat and dik-dik, which is a small deer, and they always cut it open and eat the organs first, and nothing's wasted. They give the stomach and intestines to the dogs that help them hunt, but the kidney, the liver, the spleen, the pancreas, the brain, all of this is eaten and treasured by these people. So it's really, really something we've forgotten today. We just go to the grocery store and we think, okay, there's crackers on this aisle, and there's fruit over here, and there's celery over there. And I go to the meat counter and it's just muscle meat. There's not like a brain and an eyeball and a heart and a liver and a testicle or an ovary and a kidney and a spleen. People just think that's gross, but those are all parts of the animal that you're leaving out that are critical and have unique nutrients. And not all the nutrients occur in muscle meat. It's not a complete food. So I eat liver, I eat heart, and I eat a lot of testicle. I really like testicles. So bull testicles are a great source of zinc, and they probably have unique peptides that are helpful for both men and women. And it's pretty incredible. It's the kind of thing you almost have to experience. So one of the fun things about organs, whether you're getting them fresh or you're getting them desiccated, like we make at Heart and Soil, we make these desiccated organ supplements so people can get these organs in capsules if they don't want to eat the fresh organs. It makes it easier.
Do you think that's equal?
It's pretty darn good. Nothing is as good as a fresh organ. But when you get the desiccated organs, you get them freeze dried. So we're freeze drying the organs, which means you put them in a freeze dryer, which is a low pressure environment to dehydrate. So you're basically dehydrating them at 38 degrees, like you're dehydrating something in your refrigerator, as opposed to dehydrating it at 140 or 160 in a traditional dehydrator.
Okay.
So it preserves as much as you possibly could. It's pretty darn good. But a lot of people, when they start organs either fresh or desiccated, they feel something. And when I eat testicle, I feel something. When I eat liver, I feel something. With testicle, it's often like, hey, there's a little libido boost here. That feels good. That's what we want. It makes you feel alive, right? That's what we want. And with liver, it's a lot of energy. I've seen great results. A lot of times I'll eat desiccated brain. It's hard to get brain, but desiccated brain is easier to get.
Where do you get this stuff?
Well, I mean, that's why I built Heart and Soil. So that's the company that I built that makes these desiccated organs. We source everything from New Zealand. When I can't get fresh organs here in Costa Rica, I will use the desiccated stuff from Heart and Soil. But here in Costa Rica, there's a carniceria up in Cobano, which is the town near where I live. And I bought 16 testicles there the other day, and I'm sure I could get brain if I wanted it. Maybe. There's a meat supplier that I talked to, and he delivers on once a week. And I sent him a message and I said, what organs do you have? And he said he has spleen, heart, liver. He's going to try and get lung. He has stomach, he has intestine, he has testicle. And I said, good, because I want all those organs. Send them all to me this week.
I mean, what do you think, with like, let's just use thyroid as an example, or adrenals as an example. They're putting desiccated thyroid and desiccated adrenal in supplements and medications to try to build up your hormones there. So I could see why, if you're eating testicle, you're going to get a jolt of a libido. I mean, is that the same kind of idea?
It's a similar idea. The testicle is definitely going to have testosterone in it.
Mm-hmm.
And and then the thyroid and the adrenal are two organs that you have to be a little bit careful of, because those hormones are so powerful in small amounts that you could overconsume thyroid. It's a very small organ, and adrenal, but for some people, they can be super helpful.
Yeah, we do adrenal, like bovine adrenal for some people, and they do really well. And some people don't. Like, they're like, whoa, this is too much. So
too much.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about protein to fat ratio. What should that be?
So it depends if you're including carbohydrates, and I would advise people to include carbohydrates. If you want to do a purely ketogenic carnivore diet, then about 1-to-1 protein to fat is where you want to go. But I think for most people, you don't need to have quite that much fat, because your carbohydrates will take up some of that room calorically and physiologically. So in terms of macros for people, there's going to be a little bit of inter-individual variation. But I like people to think originally to start with protein as a guide for macronutrients. And again, we've talked about some micronutrients earlier. We talked about zinc and folate and riboflavin and B12 and K2, all of which are really robustly found in organs. But protein is a macronutrient, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And I think for a lot of people when they're constructing a diet, the top level is thinking about what ratios of those to start with, and then to kind of tweak on a day-to-day basis without too much attention, at the risk of, getting overly focused on that and losing the pleasure in eating and giving it some organic feel. So I think a lot of people do best when they're around 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight per day. Now, I'm about 170 pounds, 165 pounds. That means I get about 170 grams of protein per day. Most days I probably get a little more than that. I might get 180 or 190. I find that sometimes women have trouble getting 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight. My mom is 71. She probably weighs 115 pounds. And I think it's hard for my mom sometimes to get 115 grams of protein in a day. And this is not all protein. This is animal protein, because I think that we really cannot equate plant protein and animal protein. We know that plant protein is much less bioavailable than animal protein is. So there's a real difference there that people need to be thinking about. And when you're thinking about animal protein, remember that 1 pound of meat is about 100 grams of protein. So for my mom, I would say you need to get about a pound of meat or more per day. And I guess my 71-year-old mother is like, oh, that's too much meat. She can't eat that much meat. But then when I look at her diet, she has trouble eating that much meat because she's crowding it out with other things that are less bioavailable, less nutrient rich. And this is why I want to help people construct a hierarchy of sort of food quality. When you're thinking about food quality, think about the foods that your ancestors would have always sought. This is what I'm seeking to do with the animal-based diet, is say, hey, these at the top of the pyramid, well, not really a pyramid, but the totem pole, these at the top of the totem pole are organs and meat, animal fat, fruit, honey, raw dairy. These are the most valuable foods. If you make your diet those first, and you really limit the other foods, that would be vegetables, you're going to do better long-term. But my mom ends up doing things like hummus. And that's just been the bane of her existence, or the bane of my existence when I'm trying to help my mom do better with food for so many years. Hummus is chickpeas, which are beans. Traditionally, we've been told beans are great for us, but I think that they're full of digestive enzyme inhibitors, phytic acid, oxalates in many cases, lectins, and the hummus that she's eating is full of canola oil or other seed oils. Sometimes it even have soybean oil. So I'm just saying to her, Mom, this isn't like, why are you eating hummus when you should be eating meat? And so this is the trade-off, is that if people say, I can't eat that much meat, I would say, well, what else are you eating that's crowding out the more nutrient-rich foods? Because ultimately, the reason that you are eating, or one of the reasons that you are eating calories, is to get micronutrients as well as calories. So yes, you need calories to do all these cellular processes in your body. But if you want to be vital today, you need enough calories. If you want to be vital in a week, you need micronutrients. Like if you want to have good skin and mental clarity and emotional stability and libido and good body composition and energy and good sleep, that is micronutrients rather than macronutrients in the long run. And those micronutrients are found organs, meat, these other foods. And if we crowd out the other foods, we're ultimately sort of doing ourselves a disservice in the long run.
Can you give us like an example of what do you eat in a day?
Yeah, there's a number of videos about this on my Instagram. It's at Carnivore MD 2.0. I got deleted a while back when I started talking too much about immune systems and natural immunity, things like this. Instagram is, pretty heavy-handed these days. So
big time.
I know it's a strange time, but
so weird.
I eat twice a day. Well, that's not true. I'm in Costa Rica. I live here most of the year. I eat 3 times a day, but my first meal of the day, and this is just how I structure it, is about 6 a.m. And I'll get up about 5:30. I'll stretch. I'll move in the sun a little bit. And right before I go to surf, I'll have a little bit. This morning, I had a little bit of raw goat milk and a little bit of papaya and some bananas. So that was my breakfast, like my mini breakfast. Then I surf for 2 to 3 to 4 hours. I'm usually back around 10 or 11 a.m. And I have my proper breakfast. And that usually consists of about a pound of grass-fed meat, an ounce to half an ounce of raw liver, a few ounces of cooked heart, maybe some testicle, whatever organs I have. The testicle's raw.
Yeah, I thought I saw you eat it raw. Okay.
Yeah, testicle's raw, liver's raw, the heart I cook. Most of the organs I eat raw. And then I'll have some fruit with it. I'll have a little more papaya, banana. I have some guanabana in the fridge right now, which is a soursop. It's a fruit that I haven't seen other than this tropical environment. I had a little bit of raw cow's milk kefir with some raw organic honey, a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And I think that was pretty much it. So that was my breakfast. And then I'll eat my third meal of the day around 3 or 4 o'clock. And that'll be my last meal of the day. So I like 2 big meals a day. It works with that little meal before I go surfing. I like to kind of break the fast in the morning. I do think about intermittent fasting, but not strictly. I like to eat within a 10-ish hour window. So my last bite of food today will probably be around 4 or 4:30. So I give a little time before I finish eating and go to sleep in the evening. I don't like to eat late into the evening unless I'm doing something socially. The second meal of the day will be essentially the same. I'm thinking organs, I'm thinking meat, and the organs are either fresh or desiccated. So sometimes if I don't have fresh testicle, I'll do desiccated testicle or desiccated brain in one of the supplements from Heart and Soil. And then I'll do meat. So organs, meat. I'll usually do some fruit, whatever I've got that's local and organic in Costa Rica. And then some honey I like to have with my meals. And then I enjoy raw dairy, a source of calcium at every meal, whether it's raw cheese or raw yogurt or raw kefir or raw milk, whatever I can get.
What do you think about, so I'm carnivore-ish, like just naturally, but I don't like fruit, like at all, like any.
Really?
Like I just don't. I don't know. I don't like anything sweet. So what
Do you
you
like
think?
honey?
Not really. I mean, it's not bad, but I don't eat it. I mean, I make recipes for my books and stuff for other people that I know would like honey, but no, I don't really eat it. But that's not true. If I put it on raw dairy, like if I get like a raw cheese and I'll put a little honey, that I like, but I don't like sweet stuff in general. So I don't eat fruit. Like I can't. It's like a turnoff to me.
What about less sweet fruit? Like every once in a while you can get I'm thinking of like a banana. Sometimes the banana is like overripe and it's very sweet, and sometimes it's not that sweet.
I mean, I can do it. It's just not like it would be making myself.
You don't enjoy it?
No, not at all. Like I love meat. I love to eat meat. And that's what I eat primarily. I do eat vegetables, not a lot, but I do eat vegetables, but primarily I do eat meat, but I don't like fruit. So do you think that, like, let's say you don't like fruit, can you still get, all the health benefits of a carnivore diet without eating any fruit?
Absolutely. I do think you're going to do better long-term with carbohydrates though.
Yeah.
So then we need to think, okay, where can you get carbohydrates? And interestingly, there are sources of carbohydrates that are not fruit, that are also not vegetables. These are things like non-sweet fruit, like squash or avocado.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't like fruit, that would be at least my ideal recommendation for someone. Again, like I said, I'm not a fan of vegetables because then you're moving into the realm of leaves and stems and things that are a little more highly defended. But to be fair, like I talked about this the other day on my social media, the framework that I have for all of this is if you are thriving in every way, if your mood is good, emotionally stable, mental clarity, sleep, libido, body composition, don't change anything about your diet.
Yeah.
Like you're already crushing it. But most of the people I'm talking to are people that are continuing to suffer with one or more autoimmune issues or something. In that case, I think it's important to question like these indoctrinated assumptions that we've all kind of been foist, that have been foisted upon us. Like vegetables are good for you. The more, the better. Those are the people that I really want to understand the message that there's more out there. There's a lot of out of the box thinking happening now in the nutrition space. So for you specifically in this situation, my recommendation, would just gently be to consider carbohydrates from things like avocado, which isn't that carbohydrate rich. I think it's like 15 grams of carbs, carbohydrates per avocado. But a squash would maybe be the go-to there in terms of toxicity spectrum. I think that would be the best next choice if you didn't like fruit. Do you like squash? I
do like squash. Yeah.
Maybe that's a better fit.
I don't like carbs in general really that much. I just don't. I mean, if I like what I want to eat only is like animal protein and like I make my own mayonnaise. So like I'll do that and I might put it on a little bit of like cabbage or something. So that's kind of my go-to. I literally could eat that 3 times a day and then be fine. And that's what makes me feel good. So
what's in the mayonnaise?
I do egg. You can do avocado oil and then a little bit of mustard. And then that's it. Salt, Himalayan salt.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll just mention a few things there for people. And this is just my 2 cents, whether you didn't really ask for it, but I'll interject it.
No, I want to hear it.
Careful with avocado oil. A lot of avocado oil is cut with seed oils. I know you're probably using a really good avocado oil, but I think that for most people, the olive oil and the avocado oil push them more toward linoleic acid. And I recommend sort of like, I don't want people, my recommendation would be to not have avocado oil and olive oil displace animal fats because they are higher in linoleic acid. They're about 15%. And then just for people, so they know, because people always kind of ask me these questions, what about this? What about that? Mustard is a mustard seed, which is from the brassica family. So that's kind of the same as the cabbage. And that whole family is a family of foods that has these defense chemicals called isothiocyanates. So I'm just adding that so people can see like our opposing perspectives, or not opposing, but our different perspectives on the food. So that's how I would look at that and say, okay, well, cabbage is a vegetable. It's going to have these isothiocyanates. Maybe if you got rid of that, it would be better. That's how I would think about it. But I'm just not judging your food. I'm just saying that's how I would think about that meal. And the mustard isn't something I'm a fan of either because it's a seed from the mustard family, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, if you're thriving,
Yeah.
do what works. And if you don't want to eat that many carbohydrates, I don't think you need it. Like if you're doing good and you're not having issues with electrolyte balance or anything like that, then great.
Yeah, no, I do lower histamine stuff. That's kind of my niche, is like I have mast cell activation syndrome. So I work with a lot of people who can't tolerate, histamine and oxalates and that type of stuff. But for me personally, I've gotten to a point where I can handle higher histamine foods. But again, most of my 90% of my diet is animal protein.
Are you getting organs?
I don't like them, but I do take them. I take
like the desiccated.
Yeah. And especially kidney because of the DAO, but I don't like the texture.
It's an acquired taste. I think that unless we're getting organs as children and we're exposed to it at a young age, they can be texture-wise, they can be challenging for a lot of people.
Yeah. Where can people find you? And like everywhere. And I know you have your Instagram page is very entertaining if nothing else. I mean, it's great in my opinion. So, but where else can people find you? So tell us your Instagram handle and then where else people can find you.
So the Instagram, like I said, is Carnivore MD 2.0, which is connected with the fact that Instagram heavy-handed me in the past, but it's Carnivore MD 2.0. I've also got a TikTok, the same name, but it's a lot of the same content, just trying to cast the net wide and red pill some people on TikTok too. The best place to find me otherwise is probably heartandsoil.co. That's the website where we have a lot of blog posts, a lot of information. It's the desiccated organ company, but it's also connected with a lot of information there. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but in January of this year, will it be out in January?
It's going to be out on Tuesday.
Okay, perfect. So in January, we're doing a 30-day animal-based challenge at Heart and Soil. So people can find information about that at the website there. That website is animalbased30.com. It's free, but we want to get people excited about the new year and eating animal-based diet. So that's been really great so far. So those are the main places people can find me. I've also got a podcast. If you're watching in the video, you can see behind me, the Fundamental Health is my podcast. And yeah, been doing that for a little while.
It's a great podcast.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure so many people are going to love this because people ask us about the carnivore diet all the time. So I really wanted to pick someone that I trust, what you say, and I think you deliver it really well. So thank you so much for coming on and making this really easy to understand for everybody.
Thanks for having me. I hope it helps a lot of people. That's why, we both do what we do. It's a fun thing to get to do with our lives. It's really great.
It is. Thank you everyone for listening. And I hope everyone has a great day.